Welcome back. You are listening to The Joy of Medicine, and I'm Trey Cashion, and I'm sitting here with Dr. Richard Cashion, my dad, and Caleb's over there doing his magic, and we're glad he's here.
Amen.
And so, so one of the topics that's come up with regard to medicine, and I think, Joy, it has to do with fasting and its implications both from a spiritual standpoint and from a health standpoint. And I think that it's something we decided we would want to cover and try to address, I guess, both aspects, to kind of point out part of the joy of medicine is you're taking care of a human being, and a human being has matter or body that needs to be taken care of, but also a soul that needs to be taken care of. And fasting seems to be integral to both of those aspects.
And actually, Trey, last week, Caleb, our wonderful help here, is engineer, is the one that asked, could we do something on spiritual fasting? So, as a physician, I haven't done a lot of spiritual fasting. I mean, but I guess I have indirectly. But the point is that, so I've been reading about it a little bit, and I think it'll be good. And it's really interesting to think about what fasting can do for you. And if you think about all the saints in the history of the church, almost all of them fasted.
Right.
And so I think it obviously has to do with spirituality. And as a cardiologist, we talk about different kinds of diets. So this definition of fasting is amazing in the sense it doesn't necessarily mean food.
Right.
You can fast from watching football. You can.
That's a problem.
That's a problem. or what? I mean, there's a lot of things you can avoid.
I fast from the news typically.
Amen.
So.
Yeah. I have taken leave of absence from watching the news either. It's so scary almost.
And I don't know. I just find that it kind of elevates my blood pressure just to watch, whether it's something I agree with or not. It's just something that elicits something.
Maybe you inherited it from me, but that's why I had to stop. As a cardiologist, I'm aware of symptoms that you get, and I'm watching the TV. I got some bad symptoms, and I said, I got to quit this stuff.
Right. So that's part of giving up. I mean, of giving up something, fasting from something. I know, as somebody who struggles with high blood sugar, every doctor I've talked to, whether it's an endocrinologist, diabetes doctor, or cardiologist, intermittent fasting, they say has the most impact on, and that's eating in a window of time, taking calories in, say, an 8 maybe to 10 hour period, and then fasting the rest of the day. So from a medical standpoint, without having done any reading, but knowing how many doctors have said you need to do intermittent fasting.
Well, anything that can make you lose weight, and obviously fasting has a tendency to make you lose weight, is very helpful. And one of the big problems in the United States is overeating. Right. When you look at the obesity problem in the United States, that's all just from overeating.
Right.
And it's interesting getting back into some of the why has this happened. I mean, people haven't changed that much, but it's interesting. The wheat molecule, which used to be without a problem, to help feed the countries that are hungry in the world, they altered the genetics of the wheat molecule. And so now the wheat molecule is different from where it was in the past. So people might wonder why, what was the problem with wheat in the past? There wasn't a problem in the past. It's only been in the last 30, 40 years after they altered that. And they put this out so that wheat would grow in places where it normally wouldn't grow.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
And so the genetics messed us up. And so that molecule you can't get rid of it now. And so we're faced with that problem. But so obviously from a cardiac standpoint, you want to maintain an ideal body weight. And it's interesting, in the old days, the thing that everybody was talking about was staying away from fat, meat, high fat type diets. And what's happened in the last 20, 30 years is actually, in my opinion, the big thing that's bothering people now, carbohydrates.
Right.
Carbohydrates. So fasting has many good effects from a heart standpoint, but also it's interesting, and I don't know if you've experienced this in your episodes of fasting, but back in the old days, as Catholics, we used to have to fast before communion from midnight.
No, I know.
No water, no food from midnight.
Yeah, that's why people didn't go to the late day, the late Sunday mass.
That's right. They all were in early. That's right. So that's changed. I can't remember when it changed, but probably with one of the.
Yes, some posts.
Yeah, right. But anyway, so the point is now it's only an hour, but in the fast it was from midnight. Well, so having done that as a kid, I can remember, and as a matter of fact, I get a little hypoglycemic. I can remember people passing out in church from the fast. So yeah, that's a little bit too much.
Right. Well, I mean, obviously, I pulled up kind of some verses from Scripture. So from the Old Testament times up through Jesus. In fact, there's the one where the apostles come back and say, we can't get rid of this, we can't exorcise this demon. And he said, his explanation is that this one only can be removed by prayer and fasting.
And fasting, yeah.
Right. And so, and throughout, the Old Testament, fasting coupled with prayer seems to do that. Now, this is totally anecdotal, but from my experience, when I have fasted, not just intermittent fasting, when I've actually made the effort to fast, maybe it's a day. In the Bible, there's several instances where they say, well, don't eat for 3 days. And I've heard people do that. That would be interesting. I think I've done that once before, but I was a lot younger. Right. But I've noticed that somehow there is something that happens, I don't know, physiologically, spiritually, that once you get past the hunger pains that come from fasting, there seems to be a deeper connection. I don't know, that it seems to me that that's the case. I notice that I'm not.
And after a while, when you're fasting, the things that you're talking about, the initial phases of hunger can be pretty intense. But it's interesting, the further you go beyond that, the body then tends to not have that bad feeling. And so the fasting becomes easier with time. But you have to be careful, and that's why, just for anybody listening from a medical standpoint, be sure and check with your physician to make sure you don't have a problem with fasting. Right. But when you fast, either spiritually or for medical reasons, be sure and drink lots of water.
Okay, yeah.
And so a fast allows you to drink water, and in fact, you need to drink a lot of water. Right. Because when you're fasting, your body produces all sorts of weird chemicals and stuff, and you just have to get rid of them.
Right.
But, I think, for some reason popped in my mind, St. Kolbe, Maximilian Kolbe, I think, then he was, when he took the place of a person that the Nazis were going to execute, he volunteered to take, because this was a young father with kids, and so he volunteered to take the place of that person. And the treatment or the punishment was they threw him in a pit with no food, no water, no nothing.
Right.
And he went on and on and on and on. So I think finally one of the Germans shot him because they got tired of him.
It's interesting. Yeah. I know they injected him with carbolic acid, actually, I just remember this because now Bishop David
Condola. Yeah, I remember
was talking about the fact that he had about how you can use something. So carbolic acid apparently is used to make plastic. So there's good things that come from it, and you can use something for good or you can use something for bad. It of itself is nothing, but they did have to do something to kill him because they thought he would starve to death. And I guess he probably would.
He just kept going and going.
Just kept going and going.
And in fact, it's interesting. You don't really start experiencing the effects of fasting as far as tearing down body tissue until it's after 3 days.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So if you're just doing a 3-day fast, you're probably not going to hurt yourself. But mind you, people that are listening may have problems, diabetes, high blood pressure, other types of things. So don't go on a big fast without talking to your physician.
Talking to a doctor.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you, in the stuff that you read, did you see, I mean, because it obviously the church as a discipline has, at least 2 days a year where called to fasting, abstinence a lot more, but
so
we're
partial
fasting.
fast. In other words, you can eat something.
Right. Yeah. I think they typically say one meal, and then you can have two other that equal that one meal. Is kind of the definition of a fast, meeting what the church says you ought to do. And of course, those are on Ash Wednesday,
right?
Good Friday.
Yeah. The concept of fasting from a spiritual standpoint, if you think about it, what is it about fasting that helps you? Do you think that it influences God in any way that you're fasting and praying? And what I've read, or what seems to be the case, is that it puts you in a better frame of mind right, to receive the graces that you're trying to get, from doing. So I think it's not so much that you're trying to bargain with God about something, but you're doing something to get you in a better state of mind.
Yeah, and I think part of it maybe is from what I gather is that what you have is you're letting go of something kind of bodily, right? I mean, over and over, St. Paul talks about don't succumb, don't let your bodily desires kind of run you. Don't be enslaved to them. Mm-hmm. So I've heard, like, I think Matthew Kelly, some others talk about the fact that fasting, like you said, can be just these different giving up something that you would normally have or saying no, but you could do it moment to moment. Like, I'd like to have a piece of candy. Become aware that you want a piece of candy, and then say no for the sake of, I'm going to say no just to show that I can say no, and I'm going to offer it to God as a prayer.
Yeah,
so even small things can be chosen to be something that you say, I can have it. It's fine for me to have it, but I'm going to choose not to have it. Maybe candy's not a good one. Maybe it's a second helping of broccoli or something.
Well, when I was a kid growing up, there was no meat on Friday.
Right.
And that was all my life until they changed it in probably the 60s and early 60s. And so, you just being absent of something that you really like meat or whatever. And they used to call us mackerel snappers because, we could substitute fish as protein.
Right. And so, yeah. And a lot of people I've heard, that are not kind of bound by particularly during Lent. I mean, of course, the church itself says that every Friday, because it's the day that Christ died, every Friday should be a day of penance. For a long time, that was given to us as abstaining from meat on Fridays. That's still in place for Lent, but
it's still in place in America. You just you have to give up something on Fridays.
You have to do something. You have to
meat.
Right. Yeah. I mean, meats. You can always give up meat and keep with it, but they didn't do away with the idea that Friday, since it's the day that Christ died on the cross for us, is a day to give up something, to do something penitential. And so, again,
I think the concept you just mentioned is your mother was the big one on that, giving up for some benefit. In other words, if you sacrifice for something, you can turn that into some good by, for instance, you may have a grandchild or something's having a test or some kind of problem, and you can say, okay, I'm not going to eat lunch today, offer that up for the benefit of that child.
Right.
And it works. It does help. And you feel good about it. It's amazing. The big thing I remember about reading about this, which is brought up in the Bible. One of the big things was don't go around. Jesus even said that to the Pharisees. Don't go around with bad faces and whatever, so that people will know you're fasting. So you've already received your reward in heaven, he said.
Right. So part of the joy is to do these things kind of between you and God, not to let the world know. And that's one of the great things I think about really a Christian worldview, because St. Paul will say, I rejoice in my suffering, or James will say, I count it all joy when you face the fiery trials. All those type of things, those are sources of joy. So I'm calling myself out here, as I'm sure many people out here listening are people who know that frequently there are things that happen to you outside of your control. Fasting something you can't control. Choosing to give up something is something you can control. But sometimes things happen in life that you didn't want to happen or don't like happening,
and that may result in you not being able to do something. Right,
and as a result of that, we have the ability to offer that up, to unite that with the sufferings of Christ. That is then, I used to tell my kids, I need to remind myself this. I remind everybody, we could take something that happens to us. And again, a worldview that says, okay, God, this is not surprising to God. So whatever trials I'm going through, it's not really surprising to him. Mm-hmm. He knew it. He loves me. Therefore, there's a purpose behind it, even if I can't see what the purpose is. And so I can accept it. And then say, I offer this to you because you're allowing this to happen. And so I'm going to embrace it just like Christ embraced his cross. And I'm going to unite that suffering with his embrace of that cross and offer it up. That's why he says, Colossians 1:24, I think, is something that every Christian should memorize. I rejoice now in my suffering, for I make up what is lacking in the sufferings of Christ for the sake of his body, the church. There's something about what we do in embracing our suffering that should, again, hear the word, I rejoice in my suffering. So talking about the joy of medicine, even as a doctor who may be having a bad day for whatever reason, or a nurse, maybe it's the patient, maybe it's the patient in front of you who's got a bad attitude or whatever, or it's not working out the way that you hoped, or everything that you're doing is not, is to actually have the mentality to say, okay, I recognize this, I'm doing what I can do, and it doesn't seem to be helping. That's causing me suffering. That's causing me some angst. And instead of letting it kind of overtake me, I'm going to instead embrace it. There's a saying that I think the military has, which I won't use the word, but it's embrace the the bad stuff. All right, and kind of enter into it and say, okay, it's here. Instead of me make me into having a bad attitude, being snippy with people I run across, instead of doing that, I am going to rejoice in it because I know who's in control of all this. I know he's not surprised. I know he loves me. And if he loves me, he's allowing this to happen for some reason, even if I don't know how to use it. But the one thing I can do is unite it with the sufferings of Christ. Of course, Catholics at the Mass, you're placing that on the paten. I used to have the kids say, okay, when we go to Mass, when they were younger, think of something that you sacrificed. Maybe you help your brother or sister with their homework, or you made a bed, or you cleaned up in the kitchen without being asked, or something that you don't like to do that you did, or you had something happen to you. You didn't make a team and it made you sad or whatever. We'd have them write it down because they didn't really have money. We'd have them write it down. Now, of course, we ran it by the priest, and I said, can we have them put it in the collection basket? It's going to be a piece of paper and you can throw it away. But I want them to have the understanding that when that collection, when the gifts are being brought up, we're meant to be placing our entire selves, but for a young person, placing,
and that's important to them, very important,
right? And then you have a worldview, a Christian worldview that says even the bad stuff that happens to me can be of value to somebody else, even if I don't understand it. Even if I can't. I mean, Mom, your wife, my mother, was notorious for saying,
this brings back lots of memories.
Offer it up, and it used to just aggravate the heck out of me as a younger child. What do you mean offer it up? But it is important to learn that.
Yeah.
And you're in the face as a physician. I mean, everybody is. I mean, I was just talking before we got here about my job being something that, like, things aren't going quite the way I would draw them up. And no matter what I do, it seems like something else goes wrong. I mean, I'm sure people out there that happens. That's
and we've been through that with our flood in our house recently.
That's a human experience, and so that. Fasting is a way when everything's going well, I think, to do it. I have heard, like, maybe it's Bishop Barron. I've heard other ones say, look, you don't have to put on sackcloth and ashes.
Right.
You oftentimes have a sackcloth that is what you're going through at this moment. So, but sometimes things are going really well, and everything is kind of working the way you want it, and you're grateful for that. That, in particular, would maybe be a time to give up something that you could.
Well, and even from a medical standpoint, everybody out there has had some kind of test, colonoscopy, endoscopy of some sort, and so they have to be, they call it NPO, without eating from midnight. Right. Which is like the old communion.
Right, thing. Exactly.
And sometimes it goes on because the hospital will cancel something, and so you end up waiting until early afternoon before you get anything to eat. And I've done that a couple of times with colonoscopies and whatnot, where a funny story just to relate. First colonoscopy I had, I was president of the medical staff in Methodist Hospital in Houston. So I was having my first colonoscopy. So you're fasting and you do all this cleaning the bowel and all that kind of stuff the night before. It's a horrible experience, but it's necessary. And so I got in there and they want to check everything's okay. And they said, okay, we're going to give you some medicine, put you to sleep, and you'll have the colonoscopy and wake up. Well, I woke up at some point in the future, and nobody's in the room. I'm there by myself, and I said, what in the world is going on? So I rang the bell, the nurse come in, I said, what happened? What's going on? Oh, the doctor got called away on an emergency, so we didn't do you yet. So anyway, so the fasting that we're getting around to, the fasting for that procedure can be quite cumbersome sometimes.
Right.
But rather than just suffer with it, offer it up, what Trey was talking about, for some good in the world. And therefore, combining with Jesus' suffering, this suffering can be added to that. Not that Jesus needs anything, but it just adds something to that.
Well, there's something, I mean, and again, people might say, go to Colossians 1:24. I rejoice in my suffering, for I make up what is lacking in the sufferings of Christ. Mm-hmm. There's nothing lacking from the standpoint of what he gained, infinitely given to us. It's part of his plan to say, my body, which is those of us who are Christian, is going to join me in my suffering. In some cases, is bad a situation, but in most cases, you and me, certainly to date, have not been crucified, or I mean, we've had bad things happen to us, but haven't had friends and family walk out on you and all the things that Jesus went through. But his part of his plan is for us to kind of embrace the suffering that comes our way, and or cause some suffering by maybe foregoing something that we have. And that's a way of kind of uniting yourself with what Christ did on the cross. And as I said, the words in those, count it all joy, James says, mm-hmm. I rejoice now in my sufferings. That is so counter to what the world says. And a great place for that to be are the people that are taking care of the sick, and for the people who are sick in need of being taken care of, for them to have that understanding.
And the flip side of that is if you can somehow relay that to the patient.
Right.
In other words, you're going to have to do this. And in fact, some of my really close patients that I had, I could talk to them like this and say, look, it's not going to be fun, but offer it up for some good.
Right. And I've always said, sometimes you'll know. I mean, like, this is what I want to offer it up for. I'm gonna fast for this. I'm gonna give up this for that. But oftentimes, if I don't know, I'll just say, look, you take it and use it as you see fit. I mean,
amen.
And that's part of the prayer. Is I'm not sure what this should be used for, but you're allowing it to happen. Therefore, I'm just going to embrace it and ask for the gift of joy in the middle of this. And part of that's going to be I'm going to do, because the crazy thing is about the faith, and there's a prayer, and I didn't think about bringing it, but Stephanie's kept it. It's in a scriptural deal for the Stations of the Cross, and it's counterintuitive. It's talking about the struggles and then looking at the cross, at the crucifixion. So you're kind of diving more into suffering instead of trying to run from the suffering. And I have found when I've been able to make that connection, and by grace, and it doesn't come natural, because your first response, mine is typically to run from it. Why has this happened to me? All the stuff that I think is a totally human response to it is to step back and acknowledge it, recognize it, and then say, I'm going to accept this as you accepted your cross.
One of the things related to that I've learned recently is people say, why does this happen? Say what? What did God want me to learn from this?
Right.
In other words, that some bad thing has happened to you. Not why did God do this to me, but what is He trying to teach me with this?
Right. That is a great prayer. To say, Lord, I don't understand. I'm doing everything that I know to do, and it's not working out the way I want it. I mean, that's for anybody.
Right.
What are you trying to show me? What do you want me to learn from this? And oftentimes you'll get it, but regardless, maybe He's just saying, look at what I did, and you're getting an opportunity to have an impact by uniting your suffering as part of my body to what happened on the cross. And I'm going to use that somehow to help somebody. Maybe not you. Maybe it is just, maybe it's just, hey, here it is. Yeah.
Here's something really interesting that I had never thought of before. Found this on Word on Fire, an article about St. Basil the Great. In one of his Lenten homilies in the 4th century, he makes the point that fasting was the first command given to human beings. In Genesis 2:17, you shall not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil.
Right. Yeah.
And so the disobedience of that is the cause of all the suffering of humanity. And so in a way, fasting is a way of being,
that's awesome,
of correcting that initial disobedience or something, or participating in that.
Yeah, that's, I mean, I had never heard that, but
thanks, Caleb.
Just go
by
the early church fathers are going to read some of their homilies. They've often got a take that you maybe hadn't heard before, which I hadn't heard that before. But I think there's a truth there that says there are things that we're able to get. And oftentimes there's a direct order, you shouldn't do that. But even if there's not a direct order, just the fact of saying, because I can doesn't mean that I necessarily do, right? It's just because it's possible, just because it's available, doesn't mean that I make a decision. That's to use that, eat that, watch that.
And remember what the Jesus said, don't walk around looking gloomy. In other words, if you're doing this, you want to keep it to yourself.
Right. Yeah. Between you and God, it is. Again, like I said, speaking of the joy of medicine, the word that is used with regard to trials and suffering is joy. That's so counter to what we have, but it is really apropos for healthcare because there is so much suffering.
Right.
And there are often things that even doctors can't overcome. They can do everything right. Nurses too. They can't stop a person from suffering. So I think it's really important to look at things that maybe I can give up or things that come my way and just flat out accepting them for the sake of overcoming the beginning disobedience, but also just to show that we're more than just our bodies. We're more than just what our bodily needs are. There's a spiritual aspect.
Yeah. To your point, Dr. Cashion, I think not only should you not go around telling people it should be this thing you're doing between you and God, but also I know when I was fasting a lot in the past, I would be grumpy and cause suffering for my wife. Right. And so I kind of had to like rein that in a little bit because then my fasting was being counterproductive, right, and it was actually causing someone else suffering because I was being grumpy and stuff. Right.
And so I think that the reality is, as human beings, we have to be conscious about what we're doing and why we're doing it. And you can get legalistic and say, I'm doing it for this, but you're letting the body actually dictate. Even though you're saying I'm in control, you're actually not in control because the body's now revolting and you're getting upset because of hunger pains or whatever it is, and now you're taking it out on somebody else.
Exactly. And I've
never done that before.
Right. Well, I've suffered with that. As a matter of fact, one of my nurses used to talk about feed the beast. In other words, when I would get hungry, my personality would change. Right. And so she would bring in things. She would just walk in. She wouldn't say anything. Just go and put something on my desk to eat.
Right.
And she would say, it's time to eat.
You're, Stephanie, I'm sure it's not a word, but she always says that I'm hangry, you know?
That's right. Yeah.
So anyway, hey, just take it for what it's worth. Fast, embrace suffering, offer it. And then to the extent that you can kind of share that with other people so that when they face that, they can see purpose in what seems to be purposeless sometimes. Great places in healthcare. Great places in healthcare. So rejoice in your sufferings. Count it all joy, the fiery trials. And we'll see you next time. God bless.